Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of the Fishing Teacher, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to check the video out, because today we're going to have a starter course, a beginner's course on how to fish jigs. I think a lot of times, in some of the videos I do, I sort of assume people know more about any type of fishing technique than some people do. I'd sort of approach it more on an intermediate or advanced level, but there's a lot of people just getting started out in fishing. So what I wanted to do today is, guys, give you some foundational beginner's advice on fishing jigs if you haven't fished jigs very much, and also if you do fish jigs, you might be able to pick up a couple tips here in today's video, so we'll get into that here shortly. Also, guys, real quick, just wanted to invite everybody, anyone interested in checking out one of my Fish the Moment lake map breakdowns that I built for Fish the Moment. You can do that by going into my description in this video and click on the lake map breakdown section. These are maps I built specifically for Fish the Moment. Really good resources to learn more about your favorite lakes, so you guys can download all that information straight to your electronic units. Link in the description there. And also, anyone interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler, and just shoot me a private message. So much appreciated there. Okay, now jig fishing, we do a lot of videos on jig fishing on all my channels. You see a lot of stuff on jigs because jigs are probably, if not the best bass fishing lure of all time, they're definitely in the top three. I would put like a jig, a plastic worm, and something like a Senko as like some of the top three fishing lures ever. Jigs have been around a long time. So I want to give you guys, I want to approach this like you don't know anything about jig fishing. So we'll sort of get into that in today's video. And also, guys, the jigs I'm talking about are my Blaukat throwback jigs. You can pick these up at Tackle Warehouse. I'll link them in the description if you guys would like to try some of my signature series jig that I built for Cumberland Pro Lures, Blaukat throwback jig. So link in the description there. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about jig size and colors and all that type of stuff first. There's three primary sizes that you really need to use in jig fishing. One is a 3/8 ounce size, which is a little bit smaller head. If I got one here, a little bit smaller, 3/8 ounce, and then you've got some larger heads like the 1/2 ounce and 5/8 ounce. So those are the three primary ones. Now, normally you want to use the lighter head like the 3/8 ounce for fishing around shallower water, or maybe if the wind's not blowing very much, or maybe water that's a little bit more off-colored. A slower fall will work better in those scenarios. And the heavier jigs, like the 1/2 ounce and 5/8 ounce jigs, they are better if you're fishing a little bit deeper water, or if the cover that you're fishing is thicker. Say you're throwing a jig into a grass bed or into lily pads or something. Sometimes you need more weight to get it down and penetrate that thicker cover. So windy days also, if it's really windy, a heavier jig can be easier to fish. So deeper water, windy conditions, and heavier cover is going to dictate your jig size. Now colors are another key element in jig fishing, and my Blaukat throwback jig comes in 6 different colors, but you can pretty much get by with 3. If I could just give you guys a starter course on jigs, I would recommend these 3 colors. The first one is going to be a brown jig, brown or brown and orange, just any type of a brown jig. This is a good color and a little bit cleaner water. So if you have water visibility that's, say, over 3 foot in clarity, a brown jig is a really good combination with like a green trailer on it. It's a subtle color. Fish will bite it really good in more clear water. And then if you're fishing in like water visibility, say between 1.5 feet to maybe 2 foot, sort of that mid-range color, a black and blue color is real good. Just a black and blue jig with a blue trailer is one of my favorite setups there. And then if you're fishing in dirty water, say the water visibility where you're at is under 1.5 feet, maybe you got like a foot of visibility, a black and chartreuse jig is good. A black and chartreuse with a black trailer. But those are the 3 primary ones that I use: black and chartreuse, black and blue, and then a brown. So you can pretty much get by if you're going to start out with jig fishing. Just get you those 3 different colors in 3 different sizes: 3/8, 1/2 ounce, and 5/8, and that gets you set up really good on jigs. And that's sort of a foundation. You can pick your jig size as far as the weight and the color of the jig based upon the water depth and water clarity a lot. Okay, the next situation for jig fishing you need to get is you have to have the right type of tackle for it. Now for jig fishing, for most of the time, guys, I like heavy tackle. So I use my jigs on a flipping stick most all the time. This is the Megabass Alkalies flipping stick, and I usually pair it with pretty heavy line, anywhere between 17 to 25 pound test, Seagar and VizX line. Most of the time on my jig fishing, probably 80% of the time, I'm using 20 to 25 pound test line, because you can get away with that on a jig. A jig is a big bulky lure, it's a little bit heavier. You can get by with the heavier line, and a lot of times you're fishing jigs around cover, so you need a little bit heavier line. So overall, if I could give you guys a really good piece of advice, is get a nice flipping stick, like a 7.5 foot flipping stick, 20 pound test fluorocarbon line with your jig setup with it. So that's going to be important too. Now the flipping stick, one of the reasons that I like a flipping stick is that you can move a lot of line with it. In other words, when you make your cast out there and you set the hook, you can take up a lot of slack on the line when you set the hook, and you can get power over the fish. Now a jig is a lure that it's a power fishing lure because it's got a big hook in it, it's got a big stiff hook, and the combination with the heavy line, you use that to your advantage. So when you set the hook on a fish, you know, get it out of the cover real fast, get it coming to you, and you can get control of the fish. Another reason that I like a flipping stick with a jig is, again, the hook on a jig, like my Blaukat jig here, it's a 4/0 hook, fairly large diameter in terms of overall hook diameter compared to different type of bass fishing hooks. So you need a little bit more power to penetrate that hook more than a lot of other ones. How you work a jig, a couple different ways with that depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. There's 3 primary ways that I work a jig. The first way is if I'm fishing a jig in deep water, I drag it. So I'll cast it out there and I just drag it like that through the bottom. It's like I'm not hopping it or putting action, I'm just pulling it like that across the bottom. So when I'm dragging that jig, it's just dragging straight across the bottom like that. Now this is a technique that I use if I'm fishing deeper water and I want to keep contact with the bottom. But most of the time when I'm jig fishing, I'm fishing it around an object, like a boat dock, a stump, a laydown tree, a grass bed. And when I pitch that jig out there, I want to hop it off the bottom with a fairly sharp hop. I'm not just sort of shaking it like that, like I would a plastic worm. Plastic worm, I'll just barely move it and shake it, but a jig, I want to hop it a little bit. So when I'm working this thing around cover, jig goes to the bottom and I want to hop it off the bottom, maybe a foot or two, just hop it off high like that. And when you hop it off the bottom like that, it creates a reaction strike. And a lot of times those fish will grab it on the way up or they'll grab it on the way down. But try to hop it where it goes off maybe a foot to two above the water. That's going to be a big deal with it. Also, another little piece of advice I'll give you on setting the hook with a jig. Guys, don't set the hook hard on a jig. Even though it's got a big hook, you don't want to you're working that jig and you don't want to reel down and set that hook hard. Just reel and pull back into it like that. So if I get a strike on a jig, say I'm working my jig like this, okay, there's a strike, I got one on. I'll just reel back like that and start pulling into that fish, and you'll land a lot more fish with a jig like that. Jigs are a good lure to use around any type of cover. It's like you can catch them on bare areas, like on bare rock and stuff like that, but most of my jig fishing success has come when I'm throwing that jig around something. Again, like a lily pad in the water, a cattail, a grass bed, a stump, a laydown log, a dock piling. Jigs are really good lures to throw around some type of object, and they work all year long. It's like there's not a single month out of the year where you can't catch bass on jigs. I would say a jig is the #1 most versatile lure in terms of catching fish in any water clarity, in any water temperature, in any water depth. They work in any situation everywhere that you go. So just a few fundamental tips there, guys. I think if you just sort of remember some of that stuff I talked about, it's going to get you started good and get you some good experience with jigs under your belt. So we'll talk later.